Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction, Cecilia, for inviting us here. My name is Olivier. I head up the Information Management Division of the Geneva International Centre for Humanitarian Demining. And my colleague Qasim.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Qasim. I'm the Information Management Advisor, the Global Information Management Advisor for Norwegian People's Aid, known here as Norsk Folkehjelp.
So before we go on, we thought we would set the scene a little bit and play a short video to recap.
كنت مارق بمنطقة على أساس إنه ما فيها شيء.
Me salí del camino unos 2 metros cuando pues yo sentí algo.
فدعست على لغم.
This thing moving, between 4,000 maybe 6,000 meters per second, it hits the center of your heart, you're probably dead.
A que no hayan más mamás viendo a que sus hijos mueren.
Bojim se svaki sekund. Sekund, znaš šta je sekunda, kamoli minute, sati, dan.
العمل الإنساني ما بده إذا بدك تعمليه أو ما بدك تعمليه هذا
فإجباري واحد بده يكمل حياته بده يأسس عائلة بده يعيش عقد عقد ما في يعيش.
Mission in life, save lives every day.
Life is good.
That's the reason why I love this job, to help people.
We're only here on this planet for a very short period of time, and I think it's really important to do something meaningful.
العمل الإنساني موجود بكل داخل واحد.
Don't think about your language, your original. Think that you are human first.
Now the chance has come to change history.
Hand in hand, we can end mines in the world.
Todos unidos en ese propósito.
Y entonces yo digo que así es que empieza a desminar los corazones y las conciencias.
Right. So Qasim and myself and colleagues, we belong to a sector of work called Humanitarian Mine Action. And we're here to speak to you a little bit about what this sector of work entails and, more importantly, for this conference, how GIS contributes to the work that we do. So we thought we would start by setting the problem and defining the problem a little bit. So the problem is caused by these. I'm sure you've seen pictures of this or variations of this. It's an anti-personnel mine. The defining characteristic of a mine and of the items that we deal with is that they are indiscriminate, so they are not targeted at a particular group. Anybody can be exposed to it, and they are victim activated. Those are the two main characteristics or main definitions of what we call a mine. And so, by that definition, quite a lot of other items also fall under our mandate, like cluster munitions, for example. These are bombs that are dropped and then release hundreds of little bomblets about the size of a ping pong ball and carpet the ground. And the problem with that, apart from the obvious, is that a certain proportion of those will not detonate. About 10 to 30% of those will fail to detonate. And so they'll lie in the ground well after conflict ends and cause a danger, a threat to anybody tampering with it, stepping on it, driving on it, in exactly the same way that a landmine might. In fact, our sector essentially works with any explosive remnant of war. So that's the definition, that's the term that we use, ERW, an explosive remnant of war. It's still very much a global problem. 60 million people across about 60 different countries live in areas that are suspected or confirmed to be contaminated by these explosive devices, these explosive remnants of war. Now, until 2013 or so, we'd been seeing quite a steady decline in the number of victims and casualties caused by explosive devices. it was actually seen as quite a success story within the broader humanitarian sector. We were really seeing a steady decline. And now in 2013, we started seeing the more recent conflicts that you'll have heard about, Libya, Yemen, the flare-ups in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. And this has caused a very steep spike in the number of victims, and we're back to the numbers that we were at in the late 1990s. And we'll speak about that in a little bit more detail a bit later on in the talk. So that was the problem. Now, what we do to address this, humanitarian mine action, the sector is based on 5 pillars of work. The one that you're probably most familiar with is clearance. That's the actual act of taking the mines out of the ground. But mine action is also about risk education. It's about victim assistance, about advocacy to encourage or to discourage the use and the production of mines, and also stockpile destruction. These 5 pillars of work are inscribed in a convention called the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention that was signed in 1997 and obliges state parties to work on all of these 5 pillars. And if you look at these 5 pillars, essentially what you're looking at is the definition of risk management or risk reduction. It's dealing with reducing the likelihood of a hazardous event occurring. That's getting rid of the landmines, getting rid of the stockpiles, but it's also dealing with our vulnerability and our resilience to those hazards through risk education to reduce exposure, victim assistance to increase coping capacity when something happens. So mine action, humanitarian mine action, is really a risk management job. It's about reducing risk caused by explosive hazards. So what does GIS have to do in all of this? Well, there's a very, very strong geographic component to this risk. The mine action risk or the explosive hazards is inherently geographic. We define the risk, or we spend our time, Qasim and I spend our time, defining the location and the extent of an explosive hazard, along with its proximity to things of interest, to socioeconomic assets. And it's that proximity that turns a hazard into a risk. A hazard in a desert doesn't cause the same risk as the hazard in the middle of a playground. Once we've mapped out that risk, we then have to deploy assets, demining assets, across large areas, difficult terrain. So there again, a perfect job for GIS to help us do that. So what it boils down to, essentially, is turning these red hazard polygons, they're all over the place, into green cleared areas. Now, to give you a little bit more detail on the process and on what NPA does to that, I'll hand over to Qasim, who can walk you through the land clearance process and how GIS supports the work.
Thank you, Olivier. Mines and explosive ordnance and class dominations are deadly legacy of conflicts. Conflicts are over. For example, the Vietnam War in the US-Vietnam War is over a long time ago, more than 4 or 5 decades ago. But the legacy of conflict is still affecting the local population on a daily basis. What happened was during the US-Vietnam War, the Americans with the Allies, they have used mainly cluster munitions and other explosive ordnance completely indiscriminately. And a cluster bomb usually is a typical bomb that has been dropped through an airplane, but it contains hundreds of these bomblets, and each of them are in the size of an orange or a tennis ball, but it has enough explosives to kill or injure somebody. When these bombs are dropped on a geographical locations, it creates a footprint. It contaminates a geographical area, usually the size of 250 by 250 square sort of meter, which is roughly 7 times the size of a football pitch. So that is basically a geographical area that I think we are targeting. That is the footprint that we are targeting to identify. So what happened in Vietnam was that they have sort of bombed the Southeast Asia, these 3 countries, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, was 1.6 million strikes happened. So this location, this is the map with the location of the strikes that has happened in Southeast Asia. And roughly we're talking about 7.5 million tons of ammunition dropped in these 3 countries. Of course, Vietnam is heavily sort of affected by it, but of course Laos and Cambodia is affected as well. What it does actually, these classifications, when people are tampering or touching it or sort of moving it, the items, if they are not aware of what is the risk, so they think that it's just a metal, but it happens. And each one of these has, these survivors has stories to tell. So where do we begin? Where do we start? To start classification or to start landmines, we need to know where they are. And we need to know where do we start. And we're talking about the where. Of course, without GIS, we can't solve the problem of where. So for us, we call it an evidence-based approach, because we can't go and search the entire country. So we have to look at the evidences, and based on evidence, we have to search around the evidence and identify the contaminated areas. The first step in the process is, we call it a non-technical survey. So non-technical survey means collection of information from the communities. And it's very much a community-based sort of approach. We're looking at the communities that are affected based on evidence and collecting information from the source. We're looking at the sort of the military, people, speaking with the farmers, and they are actually identifying us, telling us what are the evidences. Once this information has been collected, we are sort of, this is a map of a community. We're looking at the evidence. So the evidence is on a specific location that somebody has found an item. So the thing is with class domination is that if you're finding one evidence, the probability of having other evidence in the same area is very high. Because as I mentioned, it generates a footprint. So we're basically targeting the footprints to identify the footprints. So once evidence has been confirmed, so we have to do like an impact assessment exercise. And this is also done at the community level. So we have to overlay all topographical information, both natural and man-made, and also all sort of historical data, what has happened in the community in terms of contamination, the strike, the history of war. All evidences has to be in. So it is to identify basically the work that we're doing is impactful. It is impacting actually on the community. And of course, this is a snapshot of a data collection, and the way we're collecting data nowadays digitally has been a turning point for Minerydding. We used to be dealing with pen and paper in the past, but not anymore, because the quality of data has drastically improved with digital data, and it's streamlining data all the way from the field all the way to the decision maker in the office. So I think that has changed the way we collect data. And GIS is providing practical utility within Minerydding. And also the surge of online mapping applications and the value of web-based application is becoming increasingly valuable for Minerydding. So the non-technical survey part is done. So the second part, or the second course of action within the process is basically to conduct a technical survey. Technical survey is basically going and identifying more evidences around the evidence that has been identified. So we are creating boxes of 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer area, and then splitting that area into 50 meter by 50 meter area, and then we are searching around those areas and identifying additional evidences to be within the same geographical area. So as you can see here on this map, the red sort of boxes that are indicating that more evidence has been found is class dominations. The yellow boxes is the fragmentation of the class dominations. And the green boxes around means nothing has been found. And each box has thoroughly been searched by our sort of with detectors, with mine detectors. So now we have identified sort of the footprints that was there. And these footprints, now you can see, are turning into polygons. And this is, each polygon has to be drawn so accurately to justify the parameter. And we call it a confirmed hazardous areas, these polygons. So this is just an example of a polygon that has been identified. This is a CHA, or confirmed hazardous area, with all evidences inside. So the fact is that this polygon is confirmed to be contaminated with so many number of evidences. This polygon is not cleared. When we're doing the clearance, a lot more of this sort of class contamination will be found inside. So it is just to define that this is the exact location of the polygon. Now within that community, we have identified 5 sort of confirmed areas, and these 5 confirmed areas is mapped, and you can plan and prioritize based on proximity, based on sort of other features within the geographical area, and then you can plan and prioritize. When we are doing clearance, this is a typical minefield, and the way we're clearing, this is how it looks like. Because you're doing bridging, and we're sort of creating lanes, safe lanes for the deminers to go in, and when the clearance is happening, the clearance literally means clearing the entire area inch by inch. And there's a lot of environmental sort of considerations to it as well. For example, the tree inside a minefield doesn't need to be necessarily removed if it can be searched around. So there's a lot of environmental considerations as well. And we are following the principle of do no harm, and it's a humanitarian principle. One item has been found, so the item has to be carefully diffused, and the area has to be marked, and the area of the item or the class combination has to be taken in a safe location for demolition afterwards. So that's the stressful part of the job. Usually when we are doing demining, there are 3 methods that we are applying for clearing an area. One is the normal, we call it the manual detection. So that is quite rigorous, it's slow, it's deliberate, and it's very labor intensive. But the fact is that sometimes, and based on the scenarios, this is the most appropriate way of doing demining on the area. Or we could deploy mine detection dogs, which we call it the animal detection system. And they're used to detect, and it's very reliable means of detection mines and UXOs. So NPA is the lead organization providing dogs to our own operations, but also we're providing dogs to other humanitarian and action organizations as well. And sometimes we're deploying heavy machineries as well, sort of to increase productivity. But again, the challenges with machineries, as with any other business, machine has got a lot of logistical constraints, spare parts, and it's expensive. So it is not always applicable, also depends on the terrain. So this is just an example of a cleared polygon that you see here. You see the red dots inside the polygon. These are identified during survey, and the green dots, these are identified during clearance. Now this polygon has been cleared, the land has been handed over to local population for productive use. In a larger scale, if you look at in an area, all these red polygons that you see here are to be cleared. It's still contaminated, and the green polygons, they are cleared. Complete clearance has been completed. And same area, for example, if you look at it at the end of information management chain, dashboards helps to monitor progress. And with accurate information management, we can look at our operational efficiency, we can plan and prioritize our resources. And this gives our operation teams seamless real-time connectivity with data source. So that increases their decision-making abilities on the ground. This is just an example of a minefield map cleared in Iraq. It's the same polygon as you see, but the problem is completely different. The problem is improvised explosive devices. And if you can see, it is not coming in cluster, but it's coming in a sort of built of mines. And in one particular area that has been cleared, there's about 100,000 square meters. We have identified more than 500 improvised landmines. I'll hand you back to Olivier.
Thanks, Qasim. Thank you, Qasim. So Qasim just walked us through the traditional land release process, is what we call it, of identifying where the risk is, refining and reducing as much as possible the area where we're going to be doing that expensive clearance part, all the way through to declaring land safe and handing it over. And he showed us this in Southeast Asia, and then we just traveled over to the Middle East, which is significant because how we'd like to sort of wrap up here is to give you a little bit of a glimpse of what is on the horizon for us, what it is that we're now working towards. I was telling you earlier that there has been an increase in the victims since 2013 or so, due to the recent conflicts that we've been seeing. Now, a particular characteristic of the recent conflicts is that they have primarily happened in urban areas. This is Mosul in 2014, vibrant city in Iraq. And 2 years later, this was Mosul 2016. Now, the devastation that we have been seeing in those areas, we haven't seen in a long, long time. And there are two issues with this. One, the contamination that we're seeing now is no longer 2D, two-dimensional, so to speak. It's no longer on the surface or just under the surface. It's in buildings. So we're now in a three-dimensional environment. That's the one problem. So the first problem, so it's operationally a lot more complex. The second problem is that we're talking about urban areas, which means a lot more people, a higher concentration of people. A lot of people who've been displaced by the conflict who want to return home. And a lot of the victims that we're seeing, a lot of the casualties that we're seeing are due to people returning to their homes before we've had a chance to make those safe again. So we're in a bit of a race against time. We're using GIS to win it. We're trying to look at how the emerging technologies in GIS, namely 3D GIS, can help us create information management frameworks to map out the risk as quickly as possible, to monitor progress in clearance, and to reliably declare areas safe. It's a learning process. This is a new environment, it's a new context, a new operational context for us, so it's a learning process. The Humanitarian Mine Action Information Management Community, of which Qasim and myself are part, but also lots of colleagues from other agencies, have come together on this around what we call the Information Management System for Mine Action, which is essentially a community of practice for learning and exchanging experience on how best to use GIS tools, Esri tools, to help with effectiveness and efficiency in mine action. So consider this, in the 20 to 30 years of humanitarian mine action, we've removed 170 million different explosive items. That's 170 million and more lives and injuries avoided, not to count the indirect effects, the indirect socioeconomic effect. So geographic thinking has been absolutely core to that success, and it will continue to be, and we'll continue working to try and improve how we use GIS in this sector of work. So thank you very much for listening, and have a good conference today.